Summer of 1943, Crossville Camp, Tennessee. The German soldier, who had never seen anything like it, was captivated by the brown liquid bubbling in the bottle. Following 2 years of combat in North Africa while surviving on hard biscuits and ersatz coffee, Coca-Cola was a sweet, fizzy beverage that symbolized impossibility. The guards told him that American youngsters paid with their allowances, and it cost 5 cents from the camp canteen. That summer, 371,683 German PS would face a reality that defied what they had been taught by Nazi propaganda about American weakness in American prison camps. They found a country where soft drinks were the norm, candy bars were so ubiquitous that guards gave them out, and ice cream was a frequent dessert. More efficiently than any propaganda campaign, these straightforward foods, treats that the majority of German youngsters had never experienced, would methodically destroy Nazi philosophy. The mathematics of abundance was being inscribed in chocolate and ice cream, in sugar and carbonation, and in an American industrial capacity that made German deprivation unnecessary agony rather than a noble sacrifice. What started out as awe at American sweets would develop into a total psychological makeover. The surrender of the Afrika Korps in Tunisia in May 1943 resulted in the capture of some 250,000 German and Italian soldiers by the Allies. These seasoned desert warriors anticipated severe treatment as prisoners, as they had led the RML in driving the British back to Egypt. They had been braced for American cruelty and famine by Nazi propaganda. Instead, they came across American K rations within hours after surrender. Crackers, processed cheese, candies, fruit bars, instant coffee, sugar pills, and cigarettes were among the gems found in these field meals, which were frequently criticized by American soldiers. These emergency dinners were considered feasts by German soldiers who had been living on meager rations for months. Military documents show that the U.S. Army provided pancakes with syrup, fresh eggs, and milk at the North African processing camps, foods that had disappeared from German military rations years before. Though its psychological effects would not be fully appreciated until later, the systematic giving of superior food to opponents started right away. "We expected to be starved as prisoners," a German officer later told the International Red Cross in a statement. "Rather, we were fed better by the Americans than by our own soldiers. Our education started because of this misunderstanding regarding American resources. American abundance was intensively educated by the Liberty ships that transported prisoners of war across the Atlantic in the autumn of 1943. These ships carried up to 30,000 prisoners each month to the United States, and they were mass-produced at previously unheard-of speeds, one every 42 hours at peak production. According to naval documents, the food provided to prisoners on these ships were on par with or better than those provided to regular crew members. Roughly 3,500 calories per day, which included fresh bread, meat, vegetables, and coffee with milk and sugar. Throughout the 2-week voyage, the ship's refrigeration systems, standard equipment on American ships, kept the meals fresh. Most astonishingly, written records attest to the fact that ice cream was offered several times throughout transatlantic voyages. On July 4th, ice cream was served to prisoners using the ship's ice cream maker, which generated 10 gallons per batch, according to the USS General M.B. Stewart's July 1943 diary. This frozen treat in the midst of the ocean was incomprehensible to men who hadn't seen ice cream since before the war. German PSWs saw in America that Nazi propaganda had proclaimed unattainable when ships anchored at ports like as Norfolk and Newport News. With its vast waterfront facilities and 4,300 acres, the Norfolk Naval Base handled more cargo per day than the main German ports did in a week. Prisoners saw shelves filled with candy bars from well-known producers like Hershey, Mars, and Nestle at the port exchanges, stores for dock workers. According to 1943 military procurement records, these exchanges carried dozens of candy kinds and sold them for regular prices. The majority of candy bars cost 5 cents, which is the same price throughout the United States. The train ride inland offered additional education. German PSWs were transported in passenger coaches as opposed to the cattle carriages that were used in Europe. Full dinners were offered in the dining cars. Menus from July 1943 that have been documented include coffee, pie, veggies, and fried chicken. PS found that this was regular American rail service rather than preferential treatment. Prisoners were confined in conditions that went beyond what was required by the Geneva Convention in the system of prison camps built throughout America. Typical of the larger facilities, Camp Crossville, Tennessee, included heated barracks, hot water, flush toilets, and electric lights. However, the PX stores and camp trades had the most influence. Army quartermaster records state that camp exchanges carried a variety of soft drink brands, including Coca-Cola, Pepsi, Dr. Pepper and RC Cola, candy bars and confections, ice cream when refrigeration allowed, cigarettes and tobacco, fresh fruit and snacks, and beer with a 3.2% alcohol level. For labor, prisoners were paid 80 cents per day, which was eventually increased to $1. A day's income could buy 16 things that were more plentiful than the Germans could have imagined, with candy bars costing 5 cents and Coca-Cola costing the same. If these products were even available, they required special connections. Coca-Cola came to represent industrial democracy in the United States. The Coca-Cola Company achieved extraordinary levels of production throughout the war. According to company data, just in 1943, 5 billion bottles were produced. The military contract, which required hitherto unheard-of logistics, guaranteed 5-cent Coca-Cola to American servicemen everywhere. German captives learned that this soft drink was widely available in America, even though most people were unaware of it before to captivity. Regular deliveries were made to each camp. Work details saw coolers and vending machines at industries, schools, and petrol stations everywhere. It was consumed carelessly by Americans of all ages and socioeconomic backgrounds, who carelessly threw away half-empty bottles. Prisoners who were technically minded were amazed by the standardization. In terms of quality control, Coca-Cola tasted the same whether it was eaten in Texas or Maine, which was more than the German industry could accomplish. The syrup concentrate produced in Atlanta and shipped to bottling facilities across the country was an example of industrial coordination that refuted Nazi notions of chaos in America. According to historical documents from the Coca-Cola Company archives, 200 to 300 cases, each with 24 bottles, were delivered weekly to numerous prison camps. During the summer of 1943, Camp Hearn, Texas alone, used over 7,000 bottles every week. Germans who hadn't seen ice cream since before the war thought it was impossible to find in American prison camps. However, Army documents attested to the fact that throughout the summer, ice cream was frequently provided in camps with sufficient refrigeration. Specialized ice cream ships were constructed for the Pacific Fleet because the military believed that ice cream was crucial for morale. Ice cream produced on site was part of the July 4, 1943 celebration at Camp Shelby, Mississippi. Inmates observed as gallons were created using ice, salt, cream, sugar, and flavorings in hand-cranked freezers. The careless use of limited resources, ice in July, cream and sugar for amusement food, showed values that were incomprehensible to Germans. Electric ice cream makers were present in numerous camps by 1944. The selection, chocolate, vanilla, strawberry, and butter pecan, was more extensive than what German ice cream shops had to offer prior to the war. For 10 cents, inmates may buy ice cream bars, ice cream sandwiches, or cups of different flavors. According to Army procurement records, throughout the summer months, larger camps placed weekly orders for 50 to 100 gallons of ice cream. Prisoners routinely relished this frozen delicacy that had disappeared from German life, but the frequency varied by location and season. The influence of sugar consumption in American prison camps was very strong. Sugar was heavily rationed in Germany. When available, 280 grams were given to civilians each month. Sugar was available for unlimited usage in bowls on mess hall tables in American camps. Camps were given 100-pound sacks of refined sugar every week, according to quartermaster documents from 1943 to 1945. A lot of sugar was utilized in camp bakeries. Pies, cakes, and cookies were common menu items. Sweetened coffee, tea, cereals, and pastries were freely available in the meal halls. The disparity is demonstrated by one recorded occurrence from Camp Aliceville, Alabama. Several hundred pounds of sugar were hardened by humid conditions in August 1943, making them unusable. Instead of steaming and recovering it, as the Germans would have done, kitchen workers threw it away and placed an order for new supplies. This waste apparently upset the German prisoners who worked in the kitchen. The consumption patterns of chocolate in the United States demonstrated democratic abundance. Despite constraints throughout the war, major manufacturers Hershey, Mars, and Nestle produced millions of bars per month. During the war years, 380 million pounds of chocolate products were bought by the military alone. Exchanges in prison camps carried a variety of chocolates: rations, emergency chocolate bars, regular Hershey bars, and other chocolate-based candy bars cost 5 to 10 cents each. Inmates learned that Americans had a casual preference for one kind of chocolate over another. Among other things, chocolate bars were included in the monthly Red Cross supplies that inmates received. Standard packages included chocolate or candy bars, instant coffee, processed cheese, crackers, tinned meat, cigarettes, and soap, according to American Red Cross statistics. By including luxuries beyond what German citizens were given as basic rations, these packages complemented regular rations. German captives were first exposed to American holiday abundance around Thanksgiving 1943. German organizing efforts were dwarfed by the national coordination of consumption exhibited by this exclusively American event. The standard Thanksgiving meal, which included roast turkey with stuffing, mashed potatoes and gravy, sweet potatoes, cranberry sauce, vegetables, pumpkin pie, coffee, and milk, was served in all prison camps according to Army records. Organizational ability was demonstrated by the logistics needed to provide turkey dinners to 425,000 PS and millions of American personnel around the globe. In contrast to Nazi racial hierarchy, the fact that German POWs were fed the same food as American soldiers highlighted equality of treatment. American citizens' generosity during Christmas 1943 was surprising. Packages were sent to German prisoners of war by individuals, municipal associations, and church groups. 50,000 Christmas presents were given to enemy captives by the American Friends Service Committee alone. Homemade cookies, chocolates, toiletries, games, books, cigarettes, and writing supplies were usually included in these parcels. Communities close to camps frequently offered extra assistance. German POWs in Camp Tonkawa in Tonkawa, Oklahoma, received homemade goodies from the locals. Church groups delivered Christmas candy and pastries to Camp Hearn in Hearn, Texas. This human generosity toward adversaries posed a serious challenge to Nazi ideology. Despite having family members fighting against Germany, Americans exhibited compassion for German POWs, proving their power through kindness rather than retaliation. German prisoners of war worked more and more outside of camps as labor shortages worsened, allowing them to see American food production up close. By 1944, almost 100,000 inmates had gained first-hand knowledge of American plenty through their efforts in agricultural and food processing. Prisoners plucked cherries at Michigan orchards that were to be used to make maraschino, the colorful toppings for ice cream sundaes. They were taken aback by the sheer volume, one orchard yielding tons of ornamental fruit. Prisoners watched as quality control at canneries rejected perfectly edible food due to small flaws. About 15% of fruit was rejected for canning because of size inconsistencies or small flaws, according to 1944 Del Monte records. This fruit was usually redirected to animal feed. Colorado and Nebraska's sugar beet processing demonstrated agricultural mechanization that was superior to that of Germany. More sugar beets were grown on individual farms than in whole German areas. Inmates discovered that the casual abundance they saw was explained by the fact that the United States produced about 7 million tons of sugar per year from both cane and beets. Early iterations of structured school lunch programs were observed by German POWs who worked close to schools. Children were given hot lunches that included veggies, milk, and protein. Although earlier programs were in place throughout the war, this would be formally codified in 1946 with the National School Lunch Act. German observers were especially delighted with the milk program. Children were given fresh milk every day in several schools. For military supplies, Germany lacked the organizational capacity to handle the logistics of daily delivery to thousands of schools. Ice cream was available for extra cost in several school cafeterias. Prisoner witnesses were deeply affected by the idea of kids purchasing frozen sweets at school when German kids were experiencing food shortages. Minimum security inmates experienced democratic abundance when they dined at American restaurants while being watched. The menus at these little eateries, which were accessible to anyone with a little money, would have been found at upscale German restaurants. According to 1944 rates, a cheeseburger costs 25 cents, a Coca-Cola costs 5 cents, a pie slice costs 15 cents, an ice cream sundae costs 25 cents, and a complete dinner special costs 65 to 75 cents. German social stratification was in conflict with the equality of service, which allowed anyone to order anything. At the same price, a bank president and a factory worker ate identical lunches at nearby counter stools, served by the same waitress. Prisoners who had access to American media found that German efforts were dwarfed by output figures. Approximately 7 million tons of sugar, 380 million pounds of chocolate and cocoa products for the military alone, 5 billion bottles of Coca-Cola, 1943 figure, 500 million gallons of ice cream and 119 billion quarts of milk were produced in the United States in 1944. German manufacturing at the same time period. Milk was severely rationed, chocolate was given military priority, soft drinks were produced in small quantities, ice cream was essentially non-existent, and sugar was tightly rationed, mostly from beets. These figures, which were publicly reported in American media, showed that America's production during the war was higher than Germany's during the peace. By the end of 1944, German prisoners of war were not getting food supplies, but returning them back to Germany. Prisoners bought canned goods, chocolate bars, and instant coffee with their camp wages to mail home. Records from the International Red Cross attest to this turnaround. During their incarceration, German prisoners in America sent almost 11 million packages to Germany, the majority of which contained food items. Nazi ideology was severely damaged by the effect on German families who received American plenty from incarcerated relatives while they starved in freedom. The social divide was shown by American rationing during the war. The 2 pounds per month sugar rationing, which was more than 3 times the German allowance while it was available, was a source of complaint for Americans. At 28 ounces per person each week, American meat rationing was more than what Germans were given each month. Americans maintained consumption levels that Germans deemed unthinkable luxury, even while they were rationed. Despite restrictions, according to data from the Office of Price Administration, Americans bought 74 pounds of sugar per person in 1944, 10 times what Germans consumed. Inmates learned about America's soft drink industry, which included regional brands, Pepsi Cola, Dr. Pepper, RC Cola, and Orange Crush, in addition to Coca-Cola. The variety itself, many businesses making comparable goods, showed that there was a market abundance that was not feasible in an economy dominated by Germany. Every large city had bottling facilities. The labeling, capping, bottling, and carbonation processes were all standardized and effective. Each year, millions of bottles were made by a single facility. Every grocery shop, gas station, and small town was served by the distribution network. By the end of the war, the United States was producing billions of bottles of soft drinks a year, or dozens of bottles for every American citizen. The output of this one industry outpaced the production of entire German consumer sectors. The final blow came in the spring of 1945. German prisoners of war in America watched newsreels depicting GIs giving German youngsters chocolate and gum as American forces pushed across Germany. The ideological destruction was finished by these kids' delight at getting American confectionery that their own government was unable to supply. It was a sharp contrast. The German state that promised victory delivered famine, while American forces moving through enemy territory had plenty candy to distribute. Films depicting the liberation of concentration camps depicted American forces showing compassion for the victims of the system German soldiers had defended by sharing meals with emaciated survivors. German prisoners of war returned to their devastated homes between 1945 and 1946. While their families lost weight due to malnutrition in German freedom, several detainees had acquired a considerable amount of weight while in American captivity. They introduced a land of complete lack to the understanding of wealth. According to medical assessments, German prisoners of war typically returned in better health than when they were captured. They went back to families that had been weakened by hardship. There was no denying this tangible proof of American abundance in contrast to German poverty. Many inmates returned home with their last Red Cross packages. Canned goods, coffee, and chocolate became family treasures. Fathers who had eaten ice cream on a daily basis in prison camps gave Hershey bars to children who had forgotten the flavor of chocolate. Unexpectedly, former PWs started to support the Marshall Plan. They had seen American wealth via creation, not conquest, and abundance that wasn't zero-sum. German acceptance of American help was affected by their testimony, which showed that Americans could afford to rebuild foes. These leaders realized that productive potential, not extraction, was the source of American power. They had witnessed an affluent society that was conducting a world war and wasting food. This way of thinking, creation as opposed to conquest, influenced West Germany's economic strategy. Knowledge acquired in American prison camps helped to build the German economic miracle of the 1950s. These ideas were brought to German Reconstruction by former PWs who had observed American manufacturing techniques, distribution networks, and consumer affluence. They had discovered that luxury goods could be afforded through mass production. Efficiency and quality were made possible by standardization. Political stability was brought about by consumer affluence. Authoritarian control could be outperformed by industrial democracy. A generation of German business and political leaders were influenced by the lessons they learned from Coca-Cola and ice cream. Military quartermaster records, international Red Cross reports, corporate production records, especially Coca-Cola archives, PW correspondence, censored but preserved, post-war interviews and memoirs, and academic studies, especially Arnold Krammer's extensive research, all document the transformation of German prisoners of war through American food abundance. The foremost historian of German prisoners of war in America, Arnold Krammer, came to the conclusion that the key to ideological change was food availability. According to his research, informal American plenty achieved what official re-education programs were unable to: the total dismantling of beliefs about Nazi superiority. The stats and statistical breakdown present an indisputable narrative. PW consumption on average from 1943 to 1946, between 3,300 and 3,600 calories per day. 4 pounds of sugar are available each month, 32 ounces of meat every week, 1 quart of milk is available every day. During the summer, ice cream is frequently provided. Unlimited soft drinks cost 5 cents each. German civilian rations during the same time frame between 1,200 and 1,500 calories per day. When available, 280 grams of sugar each month. 10.5 ounces of meat each week, frequently unavailable. There is a severe milk ration. No ice cream. There are no soft drinks available. These differences were recorded facts, not propaganda. The fact that enemy prisoners ate better than German citizens demonstrated that American plenty extended to vanquished adversaries as well. The PW's exposure to American cuisine had a significant impact on post-war Germany. In 1949, Coca-Cola made a comeback to West Germany, symbolizing American cooperation. In German cities, there were ice cream shops that resembled American soda fountains. Chewing gum and candy bars came to represent healing. Having seen firsthand the appeal of American food products, former POWs frequently started importing them. They were aware that these goods stood for more than just flavor. They stood for modernism, democracy, and plenty. Former PWs who had seen American grocery stores pushed for the introduction of supermarkets to Germany in the 1950s. They realized that new distribution strategies were needed in addition to increased production in order to achieve democratic abundance. German POWs repeatedly cited food abundance as a transforming factor in a variety of post-war interviews and memoirs. In a 1975 interview, a former Afrika Korps officer said, "We expected to defeat a weak, divided America. Rather, we discovered a country that might provide adversaries with ice cream. We realized then that we had lost more than just a war. We had lost our whole perspective on the world. My first Coca-Cola was like drinking the future," remarked another veteran who was interviewed for a 1985 documentary. "It was fizzy, delicious, totally unneeded, and anyone could buy it for a nickel. Everything that Nazi Germany was not was in that drink. Joyful, democratic, and abundant." These decades' worth of testimonies attest to the fact that American food plenty brought about a full ideological shift, something that military defeat alone was unable to accomplish. The guys who came as Nazi combatants departed as witnesses to the success of democracy. The German POW experience in America is acknowledged by historians as a remarkable example of re-education by plenty, as opposed to propaganda. Because the program depended on observation rather than instruction, it was successful. POWs witnessed the highest level of output in American civilization, while adversaries were treated with respect. The universality of the food element made it essential. Hunger and satisfaction are universal, unquestionable. There was a noticeable change in health and weight. 3 meals a day, every day, including canteen purchases. Comparative inmates were fully familiar with German deprivation. Each meal turned into a demonstration of American manufacturing prowess. Each Coca-Cola showed distribution and standardization. The egalitarian nature of plenty was demonstrated by each ice cream sundae. POW children grew up hearing about the abundance of Americans in prison camps. As West Germany recovered and American items became available, these stories, which at first glance seemed unbelievable, were confirmed. Generations of German-American relations were formed by the idea of American plenty, which originated in prison camps. A large number of POW youngsters went on to study or work in America. Attracted by their fathers' tales of unattainable wealth, they discovered that the stories and reality aligned. Supermarkets offering a wide range of products. Sundaes are served at soda fountains, candy aisles with hundreds of options. The effects of this multi-generational influence went beyond people. The business culture of West Germany learned about democratic marketplaces, quality standardization, and the abundance of consumers. The creation of wealth for common people was the goal of the economic miracle, not merely output. In Germany now, McDonald's has more than 1,400 locations. Coca-Cola is widely available. Ice cream is commonplace. The shift that began in American prison camps, from scarcity to abundance, is now complete. However, the historical lesson is still potent, transforming ideologies via abundance instead of deprivation, compassion instead of harshness, and demonstration instead of propaganda. In American prison camps, the German prisoners of war who couldn't believe ice cream and Coca-Cola saw the ultimate weapon of democracy, the capacity to produce so much that it could be freely distributed to adversaries. The tale of the German prisoners of war and the abundance of American food symbolizes the most extraordinary triumph in history. A war won by charity, a worldview destroyed by soft beverages, and an ideology vanquished by ice cream. These folks underwent transformation through plenty rather than punishment. They came with the idea that the Germans were stronger than the Americans. They departed with the knowledge that the greatest source of American power was its enormous capacity for production, which allowed it to waste resources carelessly. The strength of the society that could provide prisoners with Coca-Cola for 5 cents was greater than that of the military. With its layers of extra ice cream, syrup, whipped cream, nuts, and cherry, the ice cream sundae came to represent American abundance. German aspirations were surpassed by each element alone. Together they stood for ordinary luxury that was unachievable. The complete failure of the Nazis was demonstrated by the fact that German children were hungry, while enemy could order seconds. Former POWs frequently recounted particular epiphanies, such as the first bite of a Hershey bar, the first spoonful of ice cream, or the first fizz of Coca-Cola. No reasoning could override the force of these sensory memories. Democracy was sweet, and they had tasted it. It was an irreversible and total metamorphosis. The revolutionary message that wealth derived from freedom, not conquest, was carried by men who had marched for the Third Reich and returned as apostles of abundance. They had discovered that the capacity to provide enemies with ice cream was America's hidden weapon, not its military prowess. Ultimately, the Coca-Cola bottles and ice cream plates given in American jail camps accomplished what armies could only try. They completely changed the hearts and minds of the enemy. As its greatest witnesses, the German POWs, who couldn't believe such wealth existed, brought home the reality that freedom fizzed like carbonation and democracy tasted like chocolate. Their tale serves as a reminder that sometimes the greatest triumphs are achieved not by destruction, but by demonstration, not by taking, but by giving, and not by hatred, but by the straightforward act of offering ice cream to adversaries on a sweltering summer day. The unthinkable reality of Coca-Cola and ice cream in American prison camps permanently changed the men who, as inmates, experienced American wealth and became the most unlikely ambassadors for freedom.